Bio with Shansi. Let's try this past paper question. It's coming from the topic of cell membrane and transport. Scientists measured the concentration of sodium ions and potassium ions in red blood cells and in blood plasma of a group of people. The results are shown in table 1.1. When you look at the results, we can see the concentration of sodium ions in red blood cells and in blood plasma, and also potassium ions in red blood cells and in blood plasma. The question is asking, that is part A, Roman number 1, use the information in table 1.1 to identify and describe the process by which potassium ions enter red blood cells from the blood plasma. So that means I'm going to consider this section where I have potassium ions. So I'm going to consider this section here where I'm having potassium ions. I can obviously see red blood cells have a higher concentration of potassium ions and blood plasma has a lower concentration of potassium ions. So the question has two things in one: describe and identifying the process. So we have to know what process do ions use to move from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration. And then I obviously know that is active transport. So that means that potassium ions move by active transport. So that means I have that mark already for identifying. They are going to move by active transport. Then describe the process. So we have to describe the process of active transport. We can mention they are going to move by active transport from a region of lower concentration in blood plasma to a region of their higher concentration in the red blood cells, which is the same as moving against a concentration gradient. So they move by active transport. I can simply say against a concentration gradient, which is the same as moving from a region of lower concentration to the region of higher concentration. For that movement, we know that it requires energy. So we can add using energy in form of ATP. So we have our marks right there. We have a mark from active transport, again it's a concentration gradient, and then using energy. Okay, we can go to the next question. Sodium ions and oxygen molecules enter red blood cells. State one similarity and one difference between the processes used by sodium ions and oxygen molecules to enter red blood cells. I know that sodium ions, if you look at the table shows us that sodium ions are in a low concentration inside the red blood cell. So here I have a low concentration or lower concentration. Here I have a higher concentration. But they are moving from blood plasma into red blood cells. So that means that the sodium ions are going to move by, obviously, diffusion. Because even oxygen molecules enter red blood cells by diffusion. So if they ask me for the similarity, I will say that both ions enter into red blood cells. Both oxygen and sodium ions enter into red blood cells by diffusion. So both, I can write that both enter by diffusion. How do they move by diffusion? They move from their region of higher concentration to their region of lower concentration, which I can simply summarize by saying that they move down a concentration gradient, which means from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So both move down a concentration gradient. Next, difference. We are looking for a difference. Remember that sodium ions are charged. So these ones have a charge. But oxygen molecules are non-charged. So we know that ions cannot cross the cell surface membrane freely through that phospholipid bilayer. So they have to use transport proteins. Whereas oxygen molecules can be able to pass through the phospholipid bilayer. So that is where the difference is coming from. We can mention that sodium ions use transport proteins. Transport proteins can include channel proteins or carrier proteins, and we call that they use facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion, because they are going to be moving from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, but using proteins, whereas oxygen molecules use simple diffusion. So I can mention here that oxygen molecules use simple diffusion, meaning they just cross the cell surface membrane through the phospholipid bilayer without using transport proteins. Okay, we can go to the next part of the same question. What?